My name is Drew Redden, and I'm the President and CEO of the Oakville Chamber of Commerce. We're pleased to have a great partner of the Chamber Network joining us today, one who also happens to be a past chair of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Sean Finn is the Executive Vice President, Corporate Service, and Chief Legal Officer at CN Rail. Mr. Finn is responsible for a wide array of legal, government, regulatory, public affairs, risk mitigation, and security matters at the company, and is joining us today to speak on the supply chain network in Canada and the impact of COVID-19. Physical distancing has impacted our normal chamber operations, but we remain committed to advocating on behalf of the membership and finding new and innovative ways to help engage our members. The questions I will ask this morning were developed by seeking feedback from the chamber membership, and we did our best to consolidate your questions, concerns, and themes, and we'll now put them forward to our guest, Sean Finn. So on that note, let's get started. Sean, thanks for joining us today.
Sure, it's great to be here. I wish I could be there in person with you in Oakville, but under the circumstances, is the best next thing. And congratulations for a great initiative. Obviously, that you would do this. It's a testament to how the chamber in Oakville is very in tune with its members, and to do so, I think, is a great opportunity for you, but also a great chance for the Oakville Chamber members to have a conversation around a very important topic.
Yeah, no, we certainly appreciate you making the time to be here. So, Sean, CN helps move more than $250 billion worth of goods annually for a wide range of business sectors, resource products, manufactured products, consumer goods, all across a rail network of approximately 20,000 route miles spanning Canada and mid-America. We're now more than a month into COVID-19's big impact on Canada. How is CN doing?
Yeah, well, Drew, thanks for the question. I meant to also add in my intro that there is no free lunch, but there's no lunch today, so I guess we can't really complain about it. So it should be good for the Chamber's cost structure, the fact that there's no lunch being served. But listen, I really appreciate your question, and maybe before I start, I want to really let everybody know, both here at CN, but also all your members on this webcast, that obviously we hope that you're all safe and healthy, and that you're doing your best to stay that way. I think that the chamber movement, again, the last 4 weeks has shown its resilience. It's also very much the voice of Canadian business. The fact that the chamber movement, including Oakville, is reaching out to its members, keeping them informed of what's going on. Because in these difficult times of the pandemic, I think, as Drew would know well, the number one rule is communicate, then communicate some more. So very much up this line. And we at CN have been, obviously the railway is still operating, so we're serving our customers, serving the Canadian economy. Also, every day, our 26,000 employees are coming to work. You can't operate a locomotive from your living room. You can't dispatch trains from your living room, so it's done in a rail traffic control center. The same way you can't maintain track or a crossing. So our employees are very much on the job every day. And we're doing so because we have to move our customers' goods. But I think it's also important to realize that the goods we're moving, think about grain, think about consumer products in a container, they're ending up on our store shelves and essentially for our daily livelihood. So if you're baking muffins or bread at home this week, it's because farmers on the railway have moved grain to market. If you can go to the store and pick up tissue paper, batteries for smoke detectors, all kinds of goods that you pick up in a pharmacy, fruits and vegetables arrive by train. So the railway is operating. We are having, challenges, but we're making sure we're doing so on a daily basis. But those challenges are not unsurmountable. The challenges are very much making sure that we provide to our employees a safe and healthy environment, and also reinsure their families, because as a conductor, an engineer, or a public affairs person, or a lawyer at CN, or a marketing person coming to work every day, those who are not working from home in the offices, those families are counting on us to make sure that their work environment is safe and healthy, and that they go home safe and healthy. So to answer your question, Drew, the railway is considered essential to our livelihood, and because we move goods that people consume and need. So we take that responsibility very seriously. And I must say, I want to thank all of our employees, those based in Ontario and Oakville specifically, for their continued support in making sure that we can bring the goods to people's shelves. So people, in a time where they're worried about both their health and also availability of basic goods, that we can reassure them that CN is doing its job to make sure that we get those goods to our terminals and then onto a truck for the last mile into grocery stores or drugstores in the GTHA, more specifically in Oakville specifically.
So when I read a few of those statistics in the preamble to that question, $250 billion worth of goods, 20,000 route miles, I think it helps illustrate the size of the operation and the role the railway plays in moving the economy. You talk about the challenge of staffing up at CN, but what are some of the other challenges that the railway industry and the supply chain network is facing at this time?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Drew. And you think about supply chain, we're one component. I told you before, we'll go from terminal to terminal. Pick a container, for example, arriving in Vancouver and Halifax. It comes off a ship, so you need the terminal operators at the port. You need the terminal operators to take the container from the ship right to hopefully the car, the train. The train then moves from Vancouver to hopefully Brampton, for example, and Brampton has got to be taken off the train, put onto the ground or onto a chassis of a truck, and then delivered locally. So you can imagine there are 5 or 6 players which are part of the supply chain. And we often say you're only as strong as your weakest link. So in this case, you can imagine we're focused on making sure our employees are safe and healthy, but that must apply to everybody in the supply chain, because effectively if the port cannot have the goods run through fluidly, if we don't have truck drivers at destination to move the goods to the last mile, then we have a big challenge. So to answer your question, we all have a vested interest, all of us as Canadians, to understand the supply chain and realize that we have to make sure that it remains healthy, because we need it on a daily basis. I cannot repeat that we have a tendency of forgetting that most of the goods you'll see in a grocery store or in a pharmacy arrive either by train to a terminal and then by truck to the last destination. So we have to thank all the people who work in the railway, also the truckers, but also people who work in the ports. And that's important because a supply chain can be affected by weather, by work disruptions that we had, as last fall. Blockades can affect, some cases, unfortunately, the supply chain. But if we all work together, and I must say through this most recent pandemic, the members of the supply chain in Canada have all taken their role seriously, all understand the importance of getting goods to market, and be it truckers, terminal operators, or us. And I think we owe them a great thank you and also a great sign of gratitude, because they're coming to work in a safe and healthy environment, but they are leaving at home. Family members, elderly parents or kids aren't in school, and they're coming to work with a focus on doing their job safely, but they know at home things are not all normal.
So let's pick up on that point there, Sean. CN has had a very eventful past 12 months. You mentioned the blockades, you mentioned the work stoppage, and now we're talking about COVID-19. These are all major events that could wreak havoc on a country's supply chain. But through each of these events, CN and the rail network here in Canada has remained quite resilient. So what's the reason for that?
Yeah, I think to your point, the strike in November for 9 days, the blockade in Milton, Ontario for over 20 days, and now 4 weeks of making sure the environment is safe and healthy is demanding. But in all 3 cases, I think when you say could wreak havoc, it was a bit, there was some havoc on some days during these 3 events, and there's still havoc once in a while in a given day. But I think that it goes to the resilience of our supply chains. It goes to the individual employees, who, again, the railways, the truckers, the terminal operators take their work very seriously. They know that in a container, those are goods that people need on a daily basis for their livelihood. So to answer your question specifically, the mindset of the employees realizing what they do every day makes a difference to all Canadians, not to say North Americans, is one aspect. Secondly, the fact that the CN itself has invested major amounts of capital to make sure that we have track capacity, locomotives, cars available, allows us, when we do have unforeseen disruptions that we've had in the last 6 months, that we can recover relatively quickly. And when I say recover, we get our network back to operating smoothly relatively quickly. The real test is how quickly can we recover and make sure that a container or a rail car gets from our yard to a loading dock of a shipper customer in our network. And I think that's an attention to focus by our marketing and salespeople. But, the railway comes together, we have disruptions, and we were capable, I'll talk about the work stoppage in November and the blockades, to recover the network relatively quickly by paying detailed attention to what had to be moved and when, and it's a team sport. So to your point, everybody at the railway has to work together, but also our customers and our members of the supply chain. So I think that we've tested the resilience of the supply chain in the last three to 6 months. We've come out with it pretty strong, but I do not want to underestimate the impact it does have. I mean, these have impacts to our economy, and especially in a just-in-time environment in your area of the country, Drew and Oakville and all your distribution centers in and around the GTHA, just in time, you can't afford to have a 21 blockade very often, nor a 9-day work stoppage. So I think the burden's on the railway at CN to continue to engage with various stakeholders to try and avoid these unforeseen disruptions as much as possible, because the impact to our economy is substantial. And even though we can recover by focusing on getting the job done, it's not ideal to have these disruptions, because don't forget, we're not competing with the other railway in Canada. We're not competing with the US in some cases. We're competing with supply chains from around the world. And if people have choices, they'll choose to go elsewhere to deliver their goods if we're either an importer or an exporter.
So picking up on that and talking about the factors outside of North America and outside of Canada that are impacting you, we're seeing countries around the world that are integrated into our local supply chain handle their COVID-19 response differently. Some ports are backed up due to lockdown measures, sick workers, and trucking bottlenecks. How has that affected, CN's business and the local supply chain here in Canada? So talking about international responses and factors, their impact here in Canada.
Sure, great question, Drew. I think there's 3 components I want to cover off. I think, there's no doubt that both the federal government, the provincial government in Ontario, and the leadership of your Premier, Doug Ford, as well as local governments, municipalities in Ontario, for example, have been outstanding in understanding that the railway services are essential to the livelihood of the Canadians living in Ontario. So therefore, absolutely no resistance from anybody about moving our goods in and out of communities, as long as we make sure we do so safely and that our crews are healthy. But think about the border. As you know well, the border is effectively shut down for non-essential services, non-essential trade. And I think it did not take half a day for everybody to realize very quickly that we had to make sure that our border, which is very important to the province of Ontario and to the northern US states, the amount of trade we have going back and forth on a daily basis is enormous through our St. Clair Tunnel, for example, between Sarnia and Port Huron. So we had got absolutely no resistance from both Canadian customs or US border protection, understanding that our crews had to be able to go back and forth in a very non-impeded fashion, that our trains that contain often, 100, 200 trucks on the back of a train, intermodal train, were going back and forth on a very effective fashion. So I must say, compared to maybe other countries, the fact that we're well understood both by the federal government, the provincial government, also, the city of Oakville and you at the Chamber, that we're a trading nation. We import and export goods. We all understood how important the USMCA was. Well, this is no different. Making sure that border remains open and safe and secure through this pandemic was very important. And I must say, hats off to our Canadian governments, to every province that we deal with, 8 provinces, and the federal government were very supportive with us, as well as the Chamber movement, making sure that local governments realize that the movement of trains and anything that would impede the supply chain would have a direct impact on people in our community, on our members, of the Chamber members. And I think that's probably an indication of how strong our understanding in Canada is, by the Chamber movement and elsewhere, how important these supply chains are and how important trade is with the United States, but also around the world.
So shifting back to Canada, someone once told me that one of the best indicators of a strong Canadian economy is to see long CN trains and frequent trains moving across our network, because that meant people were buying and selling goods here at home. On the other side, an indicator, if we're seeing shorter trains and less frequent trains, it's that first sign that our economy may be in trouble because we're seeing less movement of goods. You're monitoring what's going on around the world. What indicators or what signs are you looking for in other economies to make you feel good about an economic recovery here in Canada?
Yeah, well, I think, Drew, I invite the residents of Oakville, look out their back window. Those who live close to a railway line, they're going to see a train going by. It's going to be pretty long. So if that's an indicator, we're moving goods to market as we speak. Are there weaknesses in the economy? Possibly. Think about crude in Alberta. That's not a pandemic issue. It's a price issue right now. Probably the automobile industry right now, as you know, the plants are shut down. in the U.S., so it impacts the parts obviously in your city in Oakville and also in your part of the country. But I think that the economy remains, I think, strong. Your example of a long CN train, I prefer to say it's a train with 2 CN locomotives and 2 CN employees, but we have a whole bunch of cars that belong to our customers. And their goods are inside those cars. So to answer your question, we're seeing the intermodal business remaining strong. Obviously, there were some weaknesses when the plants were shut down in China. They are coming back slowly, and we expect those goods to be moving through. So we think that the impact of the pandemic is still being felt by all of us in different ways, and hopefully not at the local level, but there's no doubt that it has a major impact on our overall economy, not to say the world economy. So it's not just Canada. And, I think that it is temporary. I'm assuming, this pandemic will have an end to it. We're seeing positive numbers the last 2 days in amounts of cases we're seeing, not across the country, but in some parts of the country. Therefore, it's an indicator of where this could be going. And our expectation at CN is to have, a second quarter, April to June, which will be weaker than we was last year, obviously, but hopefully seeing a recovery late summer into September. And that's one of our challenges, again, Drew, to be ready as the recovery comes. For example, we're telling our employees, who have been either working from home or laid off right now, we can't all take our vacations in September to November next year, so this year. So try and arrange our affairs to be ready for the recovery coming back. And, we at CN are confident and optimistic that we'll get through this together as a country, and that we expect to see our economy rebound and the goods, the trade, coming back to levels they were before the pandemic, hopefully end of summer and clearly in the fall of 2020.
So Sean, a local project that the Oakville Chamber and business organizations across the province and across the country have supported is the proposed Milton Logistics Hub. This is a project CN announced in March of 2015. Now we know CN is waiting for a decision from the federal government, but I'm hoping you can provide an update on that project for our viewers today.
Sure. As you know, it's a $250 million project for an inland logistics park in Milton. It is required because the population of the greater Toronto area are consuming the goods coming to Canada through the port of Vancouver, Prince Rupert, or Halifax. Good example of supply chain. These goods come by train, and when they get to Brampton, Ontario, which is our current terminal, which is at capacity, these containers must be unloaded and delivered to local distribution centers in and around the GTHA. So I think we have been successful in explaining to the broader public the importance of having inland terminals, because you cannot have intermodal containers coming to Toronto and stopping in Chicago, Winnipeg, or Cornwall and do the last 500 miles by truck on our roads. That's not feasible, and it's not environmentally friendly. So we have gone through a credit review process the last 3 years. Environmental assessment, a full 3-member panel. As most of your members would know, there was a 6 weeks of hearings in Milton at the end of July. The panel has gone away with those hearings and made a report, which was tabled several weeks ago now, and it is in the hands of the federal government after one more round of consultations on the report tabled by the agency, by the panel, to come back and make a decision. We remain optimistic that the project will be approved. We recognize, and that's why we went through the environmental assessment, that we will require to do mitigation to satisfy some of the concerns of the greater public around Milton. But there's a demand for this logistic park. The demand is not created by CN. It's created by the consumers of the GTHA and by various of our customers who are either shippers or distributors that require the goods arrive in an efficient fashion. And we think the best way to do so is by rail. But you cannot stop the rail line just anywhere. You need a terminal to do so. So very much seeing the expansion of the demand for consumer goods in the GTHA, we think this is a required contribution to the overall trade of Canada. It's not about Milton, it's about the overall trade of Canada. And we heard the comments loud and clear during the hearings about some of the concerns of the citizens of Milton and the broader area, and we're trying our best to address them. But we're confident that we can have this project move forward. We can do it in a sustainable fashion, and also address any concerns that the public might have, but also any issues raised by the panel with respect to some of the concerns they might have with respect to the terminal itself.
That's great to hear. Sean, there'll be an appropriate time for reflection as we all look back on COVID-19 and its impact to our specific business or economy as a whole. But from a personal perspective, as a senior leader at a large multinational, what's the biggest source of pride and accomplishment for you and your company during this time?
I think it would be, again, how our employees, are very committed to their daily activities, are, very generous with their time, because obviously this is not an easy time for anybody. You have members who have been working from home for several weeks with kids not being in school, and their businesses, some of our smaller businesses in Canada are being very negatively impacted, and their survival is almost at risk. And I think that, the fact the federal government has stepped up, the province of Ontario, very quickly finding ways to support our small and medium-sized businesses. We at CN are very fortunate. We're a large Canadian company. Our services are essential. Yes, we'll have an impact, but we've been around for 100 years, and hopefully we'll be another 100 years. But I do spend time reflecting on how small businesses in my hometown of St. Lambert, Quebec. I'm sure in downtown Oakville, the local hardware store, the local dry cleaner, the local dentist, the pharmacy and the grocery stores are open. But I think it's important for all of us, and as a former chairman of the Canadian Chamber, but also being close to the chamber movement, we're going to have to make sure that our members, benefit from this support from the federal and provincial government, but also we're going to need to help them. And I think that your role, Drew, for example, the Oakville Chamber, is to reinforce, the buy locally, because these people depend on us. I make it a point in my hometown to buy locally because I know how important it is. And I think to step back as a leader of at CN, a lot of these small business or customers of ours, I think how Canada, succeeded very quickly to understand the urgency and how nimble we had to be to get money in people's hands to pay their rent. But also the next step will be, how do we make sure we get our businesses back on foot, and that all the small business and medium-sized businesses have a role to play. You probably saw in Quebec, and maybe the same in Ontario. We opened up the gardening centers this morning. So there are, several gardening centers are open. They will be respecting the required distancing. But good example where these are small businesses, very seasonal. Every day they stay shut down. This is a major impact. So to answer your question specifically, it's the resilience, but also how the Canadian business community has been successful in getting the voices heard from small businesses, large businesses, to the federal government and the province. And a lot of it, Drew, is because of people like you at the Oakville Chamber, because of the provincial chamber in Ontario and the Canadian Chamber. We're all together in this. It's a network that's very strong, and our voice gets heard loud and clear for the benefit of your members in Oakville, in Ottawa, and in Queen's Park.
Yeah, and Sean, I'm going to take any opportunity I can to echo some of those comments you made. These small business owners, they're our family, they're our friends, they're our neighbors, and it's so important that we all do whatever we can to support them, whether it's order takeout, buy a gift card for a later use, post positive reviews on social media, anything we can do to support these businesses is so important right now.
Drew, it'll be important post-pandemic that we continue to support our local chamber, because you're a small business. When you think about it, you're a small business, and some pretty big small business in some cases. But we mustn't forget, as chamber members, supporting you right now is important. Making sure we still pay our dues when we can, but more importantly, as you gear back up to continue to represent very strongly the Oakville business community, it'll be important for us to support you also and support the chamber. And I say so as on behalf of CN, we'll be there for you for that purpose. But also, I call upon other large companies, medium and small businesses to continue to realize that the chamber movement and the local chambers are important, and when we need them, they're always there for us. So we have to make sure that we don't forget them as we get past the pandemic into the recovery.
Well, very much appreciate that plug there, Sean. And we know, as you say, that we know how important it is for CN to be a good neighbor through which the communities you operate in. And I understand you have a special announcement you would like to make this morning.
Yeah, through this pandemic, I reflected with my colleagues saying, there are no doubt some very important, critical, non-for-profit organizations in all of our towns in Canada where CN operates that, play a critical role every day to making sure a food bank or other activities. And I said to our colleagues at CN, we should make sure that we identify with support from the local chambers what those organizations are if their survival depends on funding that's not coming, what could CN do to either increase our existing funding or accelerate our funding? So I'm very happy today to announce that we're going to make a $10,000 donation to Food for Life, which is an Oakville-based or Halton Regions-based organization to allow them to continue to serve their constituents, their stakeholders, people who use their services. And we've done so across Canada, so I think it's just natural for us to do so. So I'm very happy to announce this is a small contribution, but I think, if other companies do the same, we'll make sure that these key organizations, which are providing essential services for those Canadians who are not as well off as we are, continue to survive through this pandemic. I understand that the Food for Life is 25 years old this year, so congratulations. We want you to be there for the other 25 years. Continue to play the role you play in the community of Oakville and the Halton region. But also, we've been around for 100 years also, and I want to make sure that, congratulations to Food for Life. Thanks for all that you do. And it's a way for us, Drew, to show, the importance that these organizations are playing. These are also, small entrepreneur, non-for-profits, and their survival depends on the fact that we continue to support them financially as they're rendering services at a time where it's not easy to do fundraising right now, Drew.
Absolutely, Sean, and that's incredibly generous of you and CN. And Food for Life is a great organization here based in Halton Region, and one that we work very closely with as the Chamber. So on behalf of Food for Life, thank you for that very generous donation. So thank you, Sean, for joining us on our new series we're calling our COVID Conversation. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule for what we believe was a very important conversation on the Canadian supply chain. Our next COVID conversation will take place on April 22nd at noon Eastern. We'll be joined by Ontario's Minister of Economic Development, Minister Vic Fedeli, as well as our two local MPPs, Stephen Crawford and Effie Triantafilopoulos. And to everyone who joined us on Facebook Live, Zoom, and your TV, thank you for tuning in. Thanks again. Have a productive and safe day.
Thanks, Drew.